Autonomous Mobility, hosted by the Jacksonville Transportation Authority. My name is Greer Johnson-Gillis, Senior Vice President and Chief Infrastructure and Development Officer here at the JTA, and I'll serve as your moderator for episode
Recording in progress.
The Policy and Regulatory Path Forward. Before I move to introduce our speakers, let me say a few words about today's panel discussion. First, I believe that autonomous vehicles and autonomous vehicle technology is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I'm sure you've heard our CEO, Nathaniel Ford Sr., say the exact same thing. Much is being done around the United States to advance this technology, which has the ability to positively impact many sectors, from mobility access to workforce development and economic growth, even to sustainability. However, as AVs begin to mainstream, there are policy challenges that need to be addressed and to ensure that they are keeping pace with the growth of technology. So in today's panel, we will cover topics such as what are stakeholders doing to advance policies and regulations from local, state, regional, and even federal perspective to ensure AV technology is deployed safely and effectively. Are there any policies and regulations that are holding us back? And are these the correct ones that we should abide by? The great efforts made by stakeholders and policymakers, what are they? And what are they doing at all levels to advance this technology? What are the specific policy and regulatory steps that can be taken to ensure the U.S. does not fall behind the rest of the world in the full-scale deployment of this technology? How do these leaders that we will talk to today and others challenge the status quo and lead through adversity in pursuit of change, beneficial change? Today's webinar is to be an exciting one, and I am proud to have these special guests with us. And please stay tuned to the very end for a wrap-up of the ideas presented by our panelists and to hear more about episode 3, part 2 of our webinar series. But first, please allow me to introduce our panelists today. Welcome, and thanks to all of you for joining this conversation. We're going to start off by introducing Laura Chase. Laura Chase is, or was named, President and CEO of ITS America in August of 2021. In this role, her focus is to promote policies that advance the development and safe deployment of intelligent transportation technologies throughout the United States and in support of safer, greener, and smarter mobility for all. Ms. Chase serves on the External Advisory Board for the U.S. Department of Energy's Smart Mobility Lab Consortium under the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. Also, she previously served as the Chief Operating Officer for ITS America and worked at U.S. Telecom and the American Trucking Association, and served in the Clinton administration at the U.S. Department of Justice and in the White House. She is passionate and speaks often about the need to include more females and diverse voices in transportation, and especially in the transportation workforce, for better outcomes for all who use the transportation system. Laura, welcome. Welcome to our panel discussion, and please take a few moments to introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, well, thank you so much, Greer. It's a pleasure to be here today with all of you and my fellow panelists. Very much looking forward to the conversation. As Greer mentioned, at ITS America, we really focus on how we can use technology solutions to help people and goods move more safely, more efficiently, more sustainably, and increase access and equity for all. And of course, automated technologies are a cornerstone of these different solutions. So I'm really happy to be here today and to talk about some of the benefits, some of the challenges, and some of the opportunities that we see ahead for automation in our transportation system. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Truly appreciate having you with us. We're going to go to our next panelist, Scott Belcher. Scott Belcher is the Executive Director of the Automated, Connected, Electric, and Shared Mobility Coalition, or ACES Mobility Coalition, a newly formed public sector-led multi-sector coalition to educate and promote appropriate regulation and adoption of shared use mobility, providing first and last mile connectivity to support public transportation, safety, the environment, and workforce development. Scott is also CEO of SFB Consulting and co-founder of Cyberbase. Previously, Scott served as the CEO of the Telecommunications Industry Association and of ITS America. Scott has also held executive leadership positions at several other prominent trade associations, practiced environmental law at Beveridge and Diamond PC, served as professional staff for the U.S. House of Representatives Appropriations Committee, and served in several positions at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Scott, welcome, and please feel free to make any opening remarks. Scott, you are on mute. If you mind unmuting, please, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Greer. I was going to say, I think the most important thing that I've taken from listening to you read that bio is I need to cut it back. It's way too long. But I'm thrilled to be here. It's an important topic, and it's an exciting time, and an exciting time for public sector, the utilization of AV technology, which is really at a launching point, and I'm looking forward to talking about that today. So thanks for including me. I appreciate it.
Sure, it's great to have you with us. Next, allow me to introduce Joel Roberson. Mr. Roberson is a partner with Holland and Knight in Washington, D.C., and is a member of the firm's Public Policy and Regulation Practice Group. Mr. Roberson's practice focuses on public policy development, legislative advocacy, and regulatory compliance, with a strong emphasis in technology policy. He advises high-tech clients on emerging public policy and regulatory issues, including self-driving cars, unmanned aircraft systems, cybersecurity, privacy, and data breach response. Mr. Roberson has extensive experience working with the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Aviation Administration to develop policy to support the integration of autonomous vehicles, drones, and advanced air mobility. Welcome to our panel today, Joel.
Greer, thanks so much for having me. I think the one thing I'd like to say to kick off this conversation is that transportation is changing technology in ways that we haven't seen in a long time. And both the communities adopting them, the technology companies developing them, and the government are trying to figure out how laws and regulations need to change to adapt to that new confluence of technology and transportation. And I'm excited to be here to talk a little bit about how that's happening in the autonomous vehicle space.
Great, thank you. We're excited to have you. And for our audience members, we have one more panelist who may be joining us late. That is Congressman Darren Soto. As soon as Congressman Soto arrives to our webinar, we will formally introduce him to all of you, and we will continue with our discussion. But since we have all three of our panelists here, we're going to go ahead and get started with this discussion. And I can already tell you, this is going to be a very insightful and a very interesting panel discussion. So let's open the conversation, shall we? I'll start out with direct questions, and then if anyone has any additional thoughts to add, please please do so, because we welcome the discussion. Laura, first we'll start with you. Here's your question. You know, policy promoting a reduction in use and production of fossil fuels and an increase in renewable energy are sometimes in conflicts with policies like Buy America. And this is similar to autonomous and connected vehicles. How can mobility integrators, such as the JTA and other public transportation agencies, communicate to our federal government the importance of building America before we can buy America? What say you?
Well, thank you, Greer. You know, this is a tough question, right? I think that all of us I'll go ahead and say I think all of us really appreciate and understand and support the need to have domestic resilient supply chains for these different areas and for these different new innovative focus areas, whether we're changing to fossil fuels, from fossil fuels, excuse me, to other fuel sources or others. However, we all realize that there are inherent trade-offs and inherent challenges. And for technology, I think the challenges are a bit magnified because a lot of the solutions that involve technology solutions have a lot of these component parts that may or may not be made in the USA. And so I think that we need to be really clear-eyed about how do we ensure that one set of policy priorities does not inhibit another, such as leading on innovation, right? Which is another stated priority. So how do we balance those two? I think, as an industry, I think we need to really clearly articulate what are the specific barriers rather than, maybe asking for blanket exemptions or waivers, but really pinpointing specific barriers that might be inhibiting the ability to actually deploy these technologies or to meet these goals. And I think it also, like anything else, I think there's strength in building a coalition. So I think being able to work together with multiple different organizations, for example, working with NEMA, which is, the Electrical Manufacturers Association, their parts are in almost all of these different components that we talk about, whether you're talking about automated vehicles or other technology solutions. And so I think being able to really pinpoint where those bottlenecks or challenges are, ask for the right solution at the right time, while recognizing and showcasing support for the underlying policy that is designed to actually build those more resilient domestic supply chains. So that would be my first answer to that.
I love that answer, but you brought up some key points. I loved how you said we need to be clear-eyed, but also balanced and be specific in our requests. And thank you for mentioning the part about the coalition of us coming together, because that really segues into my question for you, Scott. Speaking of coalitions, you are now the executive director of the ACES Mobility Coalition. And in this role, can you talk to us about how ACES was created? Why was it brought into this crowded field? And more importantly, how does ACES see its role in building this coalition law or reference for us advancing and advocating for policy and regulatory matters before federal partners? What say you? Scott, one more time, we would love to hear your voice.
Thank you, Greer.
You're welcome.
And thank you to JTA for being a founding member of ACES. The reason ACES came about was that there were a number of really forward-looking public agencies, both transit agencies, MPO, self-help agencies that were looking to deploy first and last mile services in their communities to address equity, to address sustainability, safety, and what they found was happening is in the conversations that happened, particularly in Washington and at the state level, regulators want to treat autonomous vehicles as a uniform or a single category of technology. And a number of the use cases are highly, have got a lot of very well-funded, very, very strong advocates on their behalf. But not all use cases are the same. And I think when we're talking about shared use mobility, we're talking about low-speed, geofenced, fixed route systems, which have a very different safety profile from robotaxis or commercial vehicles. And so the members came together thinking, so do we need to form an organization? And we have really great organizations out there that are generally advocating in this space, like ITS America, like APTA, Why would we create another organization? And the problem is it's difficult for some of the pre-existing larger advocacy organizations to take particular topics because they have a broader agenda. And we figured for this small slice of technology, we needed our own voice. And so I think the intention is certainly to be additive to the other organizations in the space, whether it be AVUSI, whether it be ITS America, whether it be APTA, whether it be ASHTA. We'll work together. We'll find the areas of common interest and be supportive. And I think we'll be a good team player. So I think that's where I'll stop.
Thank you, Scott. And I love how you ended that. That really supports that coalition that we all have towards moving towards technology and growth in the technology area and advancement of autonomy in technology. So thank you for that. And since you spoke about how ACES is advancing this in public transportation, Joel, that brings me to you and your question. So with regards to public transportation, we have many more requirements for passenger safety, communications, and assistance today versus those private ride-hailing services, as example, that I think some of our panelists spoke about earlier. I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts about the importance of having what someone may say the human in the loop, so to speak, to monitor and ensure safety and continuity of operations with autonomous vehicles, especially as autonomous vehicles move to that level 4 unattended services?
Yeah, Greer, it's a great question. And in the space where transit authority or state or local government is providing these services, they would be perceived by the law as being common carriers. And so we're familiar with common carriers because they've been around for all time, right? Starting from horse and buggy to now today, buses and light rail and airlines. So autonomous shuttle service in the United States would be considered as a common carrier, and as such would be required to take extra care to protect the consumers or individuals that they take on in their vehicles. So what does that mean? Let's take, for instance, the state of California. They have a law that says a common carrier must use utmost care and diligence for passengers' safe carrier and must provide everything essential for that purpose, and must exercise to that end reasonable degree of skill. So it says that unlike some other areas where autonomous vehicles are growing, common carriers must use extra care to deploy their technology. So when we think about that and how the human must be in the loop, we must also consider that human-computer interface. And we're seeing that in a variety of different spaces with the advent of artificial intelligence in our daily lives, as well as in autonomous vehicles. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, 93% of crashes that occur in the United States are perceived to be caused by human error. So that means the human is not always the safest solution for providing that transportation technology, but it is also true that as autonomous vehicles continue to mature, taking humans completely out of the loop also is probably not the solution. So the challenge comes to those forward-leaning progressive transit authorities that are looking at these solutions to provide care or provide services, transportation, mobility services to serve the unmet needs of their community, to make sure that you're working closely both within your organization and with your transit partners to identify where the risk exists as we go through this transition and solve to that risk. And that may mean having the human more in the loop in terms of monitors on the vehicles or remote monitors that can intervene. But over time, the expectation is that these vehicles will remove a lot of that human error. And the more of the vehicles that are operating that don't violate the law, that don't coast through a four-way stop, that don't run red lights, that don't drink alcohol and drive, that don't get sleepy while they're on the roads, that will result in a safer common carrier service for our communities. but we must take care while we go through that transition to know the right level of human intervention that's appropriate.
Oh, thank you for that, Joel. And I love that data point you brought out, 93% human error, the result of what we're seeing on the roads today. And just think what over time, identifying those risks, mitigating the risks, as you said, and as these technologies advance and become more smart, if you will, that's incorporating safety, which is what we all want. Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you so much. So with that, Laura, let's come back to you, round two. This is a good one that's really kind of bridging that technology and even looping in some of the federal regulatory requirements. So with AV technology, I think we all know that this is still a new idea to many people, especially that man on the street, if you will. So it's natural to have the safety concerns at all levels, especially when trying to deploy this technology for public service. And with any new technology, it's always challenging to adapt and change from what has always been in place. And at the federal level, we are confident that U.S. Department of Transportation, U.S. DOT, and NHTSA, they're looking at the advancement of AV technology under a magnifying glass to establish the minimum safety requirements for public service. Here's the question. What do you think is the best way for NHTSA to collaborate with public transportation agencies to address safety issues and concerns around establishing regulations? And how can all of us in the public transportation realm, JTA and others, work to bridge this gap?
Yeah, so I think that my answer to this would be, I think NHTSA needs to lean in. And what I mean by that is I think NHTSA really needs to be proactively collaborating with cities, states, and transit agencies. And what I will say, Greer, is that while I know that NHTSA is working on this to some degree, that they're working on automation, as you mentioned. But I don't see that kind of outward collaboration, and it shouldn't be just up to the cities and states and transit agencies who have been asking for more collaboration. So I really think that there's an onus on NHTSA to do more proactively, because as you mentioned, this is new. People are agencies and entities are they are the leaders here, and we need to learn. We need to be able to share information in a safe environment. We need to be able to learn from things that have worked and things that haven't worked. We need to be able to learn from some of the safety related incidents. I mean, none of us in this industry think that that there's not going to be any kind of incidents that safety related incidents that it's just going to be perfectly swimmingly the whole way. We know we are going to have to learn. There are going to be mistakes made. We need to be able to say that out loud, and we need to be confident that if we do say that there's going to be a safe environment that is going to help us, right? That is not going to just be penalizing, that's going to help us learn and do better. And I do want to actually mention something that Mark Rosekind, who's a former NHTSA administrator, he's had a lot of safety related roles in his career, and he mentioned this at a forum last week that I was at, and it really stuck with me. And he said, we can either have safety or we can have denial and blame. We can't have both. And he was saying that from the context of that's how the NTSB views safety. And I feel like we're in the denial and blame era right now, and we need to get out of it. We need to get into the safety era. And there's a lot of self-proclaiming from a lot of entities, right? Agencies, entities, that safety is our number one goal. But if safety is our number one goal, then we need to be working collectively at all levels of government to create that environment that really advances safety.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And you brought up some very good points around safety and around the perspective and approach to safety, because like any other advancement, even when you think of the automobiles, we had to go through this process of learning in the field and then making those safety improvements, some of those advanced technologies that we have in automobiles today. So why not follow that same format, that guidelines when it comes to autonomous technology? Thank you for that response. Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined by our distinguished Congressman Darren Soto. Congressman Soto, thank you so very much for being with us today. We are very happy to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate all our friends in Jacksonville. We are seeing a lot of innovation up there. I know we had your executive director down in Orlando for a transportation convention just a few weeks ago, and we're looking at new rail and autonomous vehicles and the role of electric buses, and all these things we're balancing out as we are dealing with essentially limited dollars among our transportation authorities, including in links in Orlando. And so we have to make sure to increase services with the limited funds we have. We're going to need drivers for a long time, but we're also going to have new opportunities for short routes and more opportunities for rail. And so all these things are things we're following closely. You may have seen we had a great trip from Tampa, mayor and commissioners and others to Orlando on the Brightline train that eventually we're going to be connecting from Orlando to Tampa. But as you all know, the East Coast Railway, goes all the way up to Jacksonville and beyond. So I really think over these next couple of years, we'll be talking about both Tampa and Jacksonville being a part of this intercity rail where it's too close to fly, but kind of a far drive. The last thing I'll say is, my wife and I were going to an Imagine Dragons concert in Jacksonville mid last year, and she was running late because she's an assistant principal and there was an issue at the end of the day she had to work on. We get into the car and we take that drive up 95, make it in time, about 6 songs into the concert. And this is her favorite band. And I was thinking, wow, imagine the kind of connectivity if we can have intercity rail. We would have been there for that first song when Imagine Dragons took the stage. And of course, with that and a really good football team and so much else that you have going on, along with your port and so many major companies that we work with in the area, we want to make sure you have a great local system, and we want you all are an essential part of a growing statewide system that has taken a lot of our efforts lately.
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. Truly appreciate your words and your praise for Jacksonville. And we appreciated, our CEO did appreciate meeting you at our recent APTA conference in Orlando. I'm going to take the liberty, if my panelists will allow me, I'm going to read Congressman Soto's, and then Congressman, I'm going to ask you a question afterwards so that you can join our conversation. But first, let me read your bio to all of our audience members. So Congressman Darren Soto was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2016 to represent Florida's 9th Congressional District, which includes all of Osceola and parts of Orange and Polk counties. Now in his 4th term, the congressman has established himself as a strong advocate for the environment, hurricane relief, emerging technologies, and the fight to protect the health and safety of his constituents. He currently serves on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce and the House Committee on Agriculture. Additionally, he is the co-chair of policy of the Future Forum Caucus, vice chair of policy of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and a proud member of the New Democrat Coalition, Problem Solvers Caucus, Congressional Progressive Caucus, LGBTQ Equality Caucus, and others. And we are happy to have him, excited really to have you with us today, Mr. Congressman. So to join the conversation, here's my first question for you, sir. How can federal government partner with state, regional, and local authorities to attract and sustain U.S. manufacturing jobs in the field of new and emerging mobility technologies, such as autonomous vehicles?
Thank you so much for that great question. We're really in a special and unique time period in this area. As you know, the Congress passed our new infrastructure law in the last term. This was the largest investment to upgrade America's infrastructure since Eisenhower. Think back then, the interstate highway system, I mentioned 95 already, and it deals with a few key areas. I'm going to focus today on roads and bridges, ports and highways, and rail and air are some of the key parts of it. And so over the next 5 years, I served in the state legislature for 10 years. 40% of the funding that Florida will receive, and we are eligible for up to $50 billion through all these different areas, from transportation to energy to water systems and lead pipes and brownfields and things of that nature. About 40% of that will go straight from the federal government through the state, and it'll be there for the 5-year work plan, which used to be a misnomer for many years, and that things would be on the 5-year work plan for 10 years, 15 years. I know among transportation experts here, you're familiar with that. It'll truly be a 5-year work plan, finally, because we'll have the money to do it. But 60%, and predominantly all the other areas outside of roads, and of course, you'll be able to apply for road funding through this in addition, is through raise grants, is going to be federal to local partnerships. It'll be the Transportation Authority, whether it's links in our area or JTA in your area, your local airports, the city of Jacksonville itself. And so it's really key to engage your local members of Congress. It's really key to engage our federal agencies. Jacksonville is a very diverse area. This is a priority for President Biden to make sure that communities that have been left behind in the past are lifted up. And so working with US DOT officials are going to be absolutely critical. So areas like this, all the new buses that I know Lynx is getting, it's all federally funded, right? And they're all electric buses that we're getting right now. We have gas buses, and we're about to retire over the next few years the rest of our diesel buses. We are obviously, because the infrastructure law has a Buy American provision in it, it has really kickstarted and really saved a major company that was going bankrupt in electric buses, as well as kickstarted other companies getting involved in this. I met with both local American companies and also companies from abroad, like Siemens, who is doing some of this work, and some major Japanese companies, among others, that are working on this. So you'll see, because of these Buy American provisions, a real push over the next essentially 6-7 years, because it's a 5-year law, but for it to all be allocated and drawn down, it'll be really over the next 7 years, is the time when you want to think big. Go big, Jacksonville. We're not sacrificing any of our vision in Central Florida. That's why we have a Bright Line stop and over $200-300 million going to our local airport, and we're looking to expand our Sunrail system and getting all these new electric buses for Lynx. So you want to think not only where you're at, but where are you going to be 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years down the line. I know I don't have to tell you, since the last big infrastructure law was during Eisenhower, that this doesn't happen all the time. So really now is the time to do it. The other thing is, it's helpful to have consensus in your region. Duval, Jacksonville has the benefit of being a consolidated government. So like that is most of your region, but you have Clay County and Flagler County and some of these other counties that are part of the metro area that, as you're looking at more regional systems, really important to bring them into the fold where you can, because areas that have consensus, like Central Florida, are doing well, but areas that have been split in Florida are really struggling right now, because when the president and Secretary Buttigieg award these things, they want to know that people want it in that area, right? They don't want to hear like, oh, a boondoggle, why'd you fund this? We don't want this. So that consensus among local leaders, federal leaders, to the extent it involves state dollars, state leaders, also really critical. So bottom line, we have a limited window of time. Think big, build consensus, and look at long-term what we're going to need in your region, like we're doing in Central Florida. And you should see some pretty good results, things that people will see and notice over the next 5 to 10 years if you do it right.
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. If I wasn't sure, I would have thought that you have read the JTA's 5-year strategic plan, Move 2027, because many of the things that you stated are aligned with that. And I loved how you said that, think big and be future-proof, because that's what we all want, not just here in Florida or North Florida, but across the country, right? And you're right, this is the opportunity for us to grab millions of infrastructure investment, but it only comes when we partner together. And you've all done that wonderfully in Central Florida. We're doing that here in North Florida and Jacksonville. Our own mayor supports what we're doing, and we are supportive of all the advancements in our city together. But I loved how you couched that for us all. It's some great lessons for us to just take away. So thank you for that.
And one last thing, because you mentioned autonomous vehicles, and I was remiss in my remarks on it. So BEEP is headquartered in our district in Central Florida. We have in Lake Nona, our medical city, the longest running autonomous public transit in the nation. To get that prize, you have to be circa 2019. So this is a new field, obviously. And we're working in downtown Orlando and Tampa, I know in Jacksonville, in other states like in Phoenix, Arizona, and areas of California. So the way I envision it is we're always going to need buses, and we're moving towards electric buses with drivers that do these long routes and on highways. I mean, think how big Duval County is. But with limited funds, how do we do some of these shorter routes once you get to the bus station and you got another mile or two to go, right? And so that's where I think some of this last golden mile, these next couple of miles are going to be key. And then where you have a lot of density, think downtown Jacksonville. I also, as you mentioned, serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee. In our IDC subcommittee, we review things like autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence, and other areas. And we regulate every Fortune 500 company, including in this area, in that committee. So we are watching this area closely. We have legislation we're working on, but I strongly encourage folks this is a way to help stretch your dollars, get to more stops, serve that last mile, and better serve your riders, which both they and their employers are counting on them getting to work.
So true, so true. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for having me, everybody. I wish you a great conversation. I'll be able to stick around for a few minutes and just appreciate the invitation today.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, sir. So Scott, let me turn to you, sir. Lots of good conversation around us. My next question for you: how will society adapt to the loss of service jobs that will result from automated driving? What new roles could fill this gap, and how can policymakers ease the transition?
Thanks, Greer. That's an important question, and one that's being asked at all levels. And I think at least shared, I'm not sure it's an important question, but I'm not sure it's the right question, because I think the technologies that we're talking about are additive as opposed to replacing existing jobs. And so there's going to be new jobs that we're not going to be replacing bus drivers. As Congressman Soto talked about, we're taking shuttles into neighborhoods where buses wouldn't currently be able to drive. And for the foreseeable future, even when we're operating level 4 vehicles, many of the people who are going to be deploying them are going to keep a safety operator on. So what I really see is job creation opportunities. I see companies like BEEP coming into Florida with their supply chain, with their partners, creating new industries and new jobs and economic development. And these are good jobs. These pay well. It's in more modern technology, and there's a real opportunity. And so I think one of the things that we all have to do is to work with labor on this issue, to help them understand that collectively we can make sure that they're part of the solution. These new jobs that we're creating, those can be labor jobs. They don't have to take jobs away, but they can be additive. They can add members to their unions, and we can work together. And I think, as Laura mentioned and Congressman Soto mentioned, this is not something that any individual group can do. We're only going to be able to do this together, both across private industry, but also private industry partnering with the public sector, and recognizing the sensitivities that are there, and making sure that we act appropriately. But again, I think the question is really how do we get people to understand the opportunities that this new technology creates in terms of job creation?
That's it. That's it right there. Part of that education, right? Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Joel, one more question for you, sir, bringing you back into the conversation. You know, autonomous vehicles will bring huge changes to the way we travel, and it also may have some widespread implications. Do you think that the US DOT and NHTSA should implement a national campaign to promote and educate drivers on any unique considerations of sharing the roads with autonomous vehicles, as well as the safety and reliability of those vehicles?
I think it's a great question. I think it's going to require all of us to help educate consumers as to what the capabilities are of autonomous vehicles today, the difference between advanced driver assist technology that allows your vehicle to help you brake, help you to stay in your lane, versus technology that drives the vehicle, level 4 or level 5, so that consumers know exactly what they're purchasing or exactly what they're riding in when they join a ride-hailing service or an autonomous shuttle service today. And that's going to require both Congress and the executive branch, but especially the community, to bring that awareness to our neighbors and our communities. And that is happening today. Secretary Buttigieg spoke on CNBC just last week, and he was asked a question after some incidents with ride-hailing services about the safety of autonomous vehicles. And he said unequivocally that the current situation is not sustainable. Human drivers are not great at driving. And the potential of autonomous vehicles brings opportunity to improve safety, but it requires the regulators to take a very keep a close eye on the technology and the way that it's developed. But he finished that interview in an interesting way. He said, we could have a radically safer country with the adoption of autonomous vehicles, because frankly, in his words, the track record of human drivers is murderous. And so when you think about that and you think about the potential of autonomous vehicles, it means we have an obligation to explore and to adopt this technology, but to do it in a way that's responsible and a way that helps educate the community about what the capabilities of the technology are as it comes online.
So true, so true. That's our obligation. Wholeheartedly agree with you on that. Thank you. Mr. Congressman, if we can ask one more question of you, we would love to do so.
Sure.
This next question, it starts off by saying that, you know, there are inconsistent state regulations that can pose a risk, and there's bound to be some angst, maybe is the word, between federal and state governments about the respective roles when it comes to regulating autonomous vehicles, really any emerging technologies. How can we ensure that a legislative middle ground is reached and that the lines become clearer so that innovation is not stifled because of the perceived blurred lines of ownership?
Well, I can tell you the reality of what you will see happen over the next couple of years. And because of this natural progression, it allows for innovation as we develop a final, more national rule. Like, the states are our constitutional laboratories. They are the ones, particularly Florida and California, are working closely in this area. We all are familiar with a lot of the work in California with these driverless taxis that are being developed, and there's been a lot of focus on that. We have had laws in the books in Florida since I was in the state Senate to allow for experimenting with autonomous tractor trailers on the turnpike. So that's been around for a while, probably a lot longer than I think most people realize. And of course, we have SunTrax in Polk County, which used to be my old district, and we have Beep in Lake Nono in the district. So in the meantime, as states are experimenting with what works, NHTSA, as you know, has been taking testimony and may roll out a more national rule. But when we put out a rule, 340 million Americans have to follow it. So it is, for me, I'm A-okay with starting with the states developing rules so that we have a great amount of data information when we finally make the decision on this. And a lot of times, even the agencies act even before the Congress, and then eventually we codify certain rules and regulations that NHTSA may put out. Or if there's a disagreement with them, then the Congress can supersede it with ultimately a framework of laws. There are laws in the books that give NHTSA enough authority to do basic regulation because they're still vehicles. It's still about protecting human life. And right now, most of NHTSA's role has been to carefully select waivers for different technologies. And if something bad happens, they revoke that waiver, and then, well, then you can't do any more experimenting in our streets. And so the waiver programs, so I've been involved in the waiver programs for BEEP, for instance, directly. And I know members in the California delegation have been involved in various different autonomous vehicle waivers. So that system, I think, will be okay for now as we're in the innovation stage. But much like with now, we're really putting pen to paper to try to get a national privacy standard, since, you know, websites and social media are already very mature industries. It's time to get an ultimate national standard for privacy. We're not quite there yet with autonomous vehicles, and I'm okay with that because they're still, for everybody watching, they're still highly regulated, can only operate with a waiver from NHTSA, and states do have rules of the road on this stuff. And so we need to continue to move ahead on this. But I think regulatorily, maybe we'll see something next year from NHTSA. Maybe it'll be a waiver regime for a few more years. And ultimately, it'll be probably 5 to 10 years before we see Congress actually put together a national law. So in the meantime, the states will be the big innovators. And I continue to work with our state on those innovations as well as the NHTSA waivers.
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. Love that.
And thanks for having me.
Thanks for being with us. Thank you.
Appreciate all you.
Appreciate you, sir. Take care. And for Scott, Laura, Joel, one more question to ask to just kind of round out this conversation. What policies and regulations do you think are limiting AV growth and adoption, and which ones may be impeding its progress? What are your recommendations, your thoughts to improve policy around AVs? I'll open it up to anyone who wants to get us started.
I'll jump in. So in the shuttle space, the biggest impediment right now is Buy America. A slightly nuanced answer from Laura's, just with respect to this particular area. So there are no American manufacturers of shared use mobility vehicles any longer. And so Jacksonville and some other progressive agencies and private companies have recruited 2 German manufacturers to come to the United States to create new jobs, to create manufacturing facilities, to meet Buy America, and to use their tier 1 capabilities to produce shuttles that will last for 15 years and that will be FMVSS compliant. But in order to do that, they need to believe that there's a stable regulatory environment. And right now, the way the regulations work with the existing class of vehicles, you get a permit, and I'm telling you, Greer, what you already know. You get a permit for a year, and then you have to take the vehicle out of the country and bring it back in. That's crazy. And if you want somebody to come into the United States and invest billions of dollars and set up a manufacturing capability in this country, they need to know that they're going to be able to do that, and they're not going to have to deal with those kinds of regulations. The second thing is that in order to do that kind of manufacturing, especially if you're a foreign company, and you're creating new form factors, you're going to have to create a new supply chain. And while the manufacturers that are coming to the United States have existing supply chains, they are in fact in Germany. And so they need what we're calling an on-ramp to Buy America. Not a waiver, but an on-ramp, an ability for them to build their supply chain over the next 2 to 3 years to meet that 70% threshold. And that's the kind of certainty that we need to create new industries in the United States so that we are competitive, and so that we're not losing this industry to China or to other aggressive countries that are active in this space.
Thank you, Scott.
I can
Joel?
chime in on that. Yeah, Scott mentioned the FMVSS. For those of you that don't know that acronym, it stands for the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. So those are standards that automakers have to certify that their vehicle meets in order to be entered into interstate commerce, essentially to be used in the United States. And one of the things that is a blocker for the adoption of autonomous vehicles is those FMVSS standards were written logically for a human driver. I think the Volpe Center did an analysis, and I think there's 63 references to the human driver, right? In the United States, the driver sits in the front left-hand seat. There's a steering wheel for the human hand. There's a brake pedal on the left for the human foot, a gas pedal on the right for the human foot. The mirrors are configured for the human eye. As we think about the autonomous vehicles that may not need a steering wheel or brake or gas pedal or mirrors, for the human eye, those standards have to be updated. And so the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, knows that that is the case. What they're trying to identify is how can we develop a standard that is technology agnostic, human eye technology or computer vision technology agnostic, and meets the safety outcome that they're trying to achieve, without unnecessarily limiting technology by writing a standard that's based off of what's available today. So I think that is one of the blockers to innovation. It would be great if a company could take a vehicle off the assembly line without some of those components that are required for the human, and start to put it into service without having to get an exemption or a waiver. And there is comprehensive autonomous vehicle legislation that's pending before Congress, including the Energy and Commerce Committee that Congressman Soto sits on, that they have been trying to enact that would help create some timelines for NHTSA to start that process and finish the process, so that we can get in a regulatory environment that doesn't decrease safety, but addresses the safety risks in this new environment. I think that'll be critical for us having a pathway forward.
All right, thank you. So some certainty here, definitely, with updating some, the FMVSS, the on-ramp to Buy America. Anything else we should be updating?
I'll add a couple things, Greer. So I'm going to talk about, we talk about 5 things that you need for deployment of technology. And this ties into it. So any technology, right? But we can tailor this to automation. So you need leadership at all levels, federal, state, local. It's really hard to deploy new technology without leadership at all levels. Someone who is saying, articulating why they're doing this, who's willing to take the risk. It's always a risk to try something new. And he basically saying, I got your back, right? This is new. We're going to do it for these reasons. We're trying to create these outcomes, whether it's safety, whether it's equity, whether it's sustainability, maybe it's all 3. Second thing, a regulatory environment that allows for experimentation and innovation while holding to standards on safety, equity, and mobility. So I second what Joel said. The reality is, yes, companies can deploy, but we don't really have a certain regulatory environment, and that does inhibit innovation. That does, when you cannot see a real full path to scaling deployment, that is a massive consideration for these manufacturers, for the private sector. When you have to do an analysis state by state of what you want to do and what you can do, I mean, that is an inhibiting factor. So I think the regulatory environment is really important. Public engagement is a third. And I'm not talking about public acceptance or assumed public acceptance. Although we all understand the benefits of autonomous vehicles and we all believe that they are going, increase safety and all that, we can't go out there and just say to people, you need to accept this because here are all the great things it can do. we have to engage with the public, listen to them, understand their concerns, and talk about how maybe these concerns can be resolved, or what benefits and outcomes they can bring to the public. Workforce, as Scott mentioned, there's going to be changes in the workforce. And, we work with labor a lot. And, what labor really wants to understand is, what's a realistic timeline for these changes? Where is a gap analysis of how this is going to impact jobs? Right. It might be true that we may not be pulling drivers out of buses, in the next 5 years, but this technology does impact a lot of different roles and skills. And so how do we need to be planning to reskill and upskill the workforce? There are new jobs created. There are opportunities created, but we need to all be working together to really define that out so we can plan for it, being proactive, not reactive. And then finally, investment. If we really want to scale and deploy tech, we need to prioritize investment across funding streams. A lot of times tech is available in discretionary grants, which means you have to compete for it to get it. And then finally, I'd say in modernizing our funding mechanisms, which were really developed for funding physical infrastructure, not funding technology-based solutions. So I would say those are 5 things that we think about in terms of how to create the environment to deploy new technologies.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this panel has pretty much laid out the roadmap, if you will, on what are the changes that we should be advocating for, championing for with our federal, regional, and state partners on how we advance technology so it's not inhibiting anyone from really bringing these technologies to bear for use in public service. Thank you. Thank you for that. And with our time remaining in 30 seconds or less, Laura, Joel, Scott, anyone that wants to join into this, what can our audience do, the viewers do, to support the progression of wide-scale deployment of AVs in the U.S.? What say you?
I can jump in. I think identifying unmet mobility needs to your local community and to your members of Congress, I think, is critically important. There are so many communities around the country that there isn't a rail line or a bus line that reaches them. There's mobility challenged individuals that are currently serviced by one bus with a human driver that has to drive into one community to pick them up and bring them to public transit. But identifying where those needs are so that there can be smart investments, as Laura was suggesting, and strong leadership, I think is going to be critically important. And then, be open to trying these new technologies. I rode in my first fully autonomous vehicle this summer, and it's different. Looking in that front seat and then seeing nobody there is startling. And as soon as we were, 10 minutes into the ride, I wasn't even thinking about it. I was talking to someone else in the back seat, and it seemed normal. So it is quickly becomes commonplace, but be willing to try and try out the technology and evaluate it for yourself.
Great, thank you.
Well, I'll go. I guess I think be curious. I mean, where you're seeing these technologies, as Joel said, go try them. But more importantly, go talk to the agencies that are deploying them, because it's if you've seen, I borrow this from somebody else, but if you've seen one deployment, you've seen one deployment. And so trying to understand what's going on. I also think if you've got children, this is an area that is going to be a great opportunity for people to have really fulfilling careers. And when we visited JTA, your learning facility, your test and learn facility, I was so impressed with the students that you had there, and their willingness to stand up in front of a whole bunch of government officials, and they were so confident and so intelligent, and they made me feel, they didn't make me feel inadequate, but I was so proud of them. And I thought, this is the future. And I think that that's something that we really need to promote. It goes back to the workforce development issue that Laura was talking about and Joel was talking about and the Congressman was talking about. There are great opportunities, especially for young people. And the earlier they get exposed to this, the better. So I think the communities can really do themselves a great service to bring schools, to bring classes, and to get this into every level of education.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks for that shout out to our Test and Learn Center team.
I'll
Lori, will
just,
you close us
yeah,
out?
I will just ditto, engage, be curious, make your voice heard, and ask why. Why is this being deployed? Because honestly, the answer is usually really impressive about the new service that's being provided or who it's serving and how. And so I think that's really important to understand why and who it's serving that may not have had that option before.
So true. Thank you for that. And for Congressman Soto, who's no longer with us, I'll use for him, think big, be bold, and future-proof. Those were 3 takeaways that he gave us today. So with that, our hour has gone by very quickly, and I'm sure if we had another hour, we still couldn't get through the conversation and the dialogue. So interesting, but this will not be our last webinar, and I'm sure for all of our viewers, you will see our guest again real soon. To my panelists, to Scott, to Laura, to Joel, and to Congressman Darren Soto, thank you so very much for being with us today. Thank you for your words, and thank you for your insights. It was truly appreciative of all of us who joined the webinar for today. And lots of great highlights and takeaways, but partnership, collaboration, advancing championship, being bold, thinking big. Some of the key takeaways we've got from our lessons today on how we advance policy and regulation. So to our viewers, we hope this session has been worth your time. For me, it certainly was. But now I have a small request for you. Well, it may start out small and really will become big, but it's a lot of what you heard today from our distinguished panelists. If you believe, as we do, that autonomous vehicle technology is a step forward to advance mobility, sustainability, equity, accessibility, and even more, then please get engaged, get educated, and bring others along with you. Make your voice heard in your communities from a local level, state level, regional level, and even from a federal level. And make your voice heard to your leaders. And I'm going to use something that Scott started off with. Be an educator to the future generations. The future generations that want to see their dreams become a reality. With that, I invite you to stay tuned. For more information that will be coming soon, we're on episode 3, part 2 of this discussion on policy and regulation advances around autonomous vehicle technologies. We're going to continue elevating this very important discussion. With that, I thank you all for your time this afternoon and have a wonderful rest of the day. Take care. Bye-bye.